Good evening, and thanks for joining tonight's TI Technology webinar hosted by Texas Instruments. For tonight, we're going to start a three-part series on grant writing, and tonight we're going to focus on the overview of grants and funding sources. My name is Mike Houston, and I'm the moderator for this event. I teach algebra and calculus in Pittsburgh, where I use TI Technology to make tough-to-teach, tough-to-learn concepts accessible to all my students. Tonight, we're really lucky to be joined by our two panelists, Jen Cesar and Doris Teague. Jen is a grant partnership consultant with Texas Instruments, and before coming to TI, she taught middle grades math and science for Carlton Farmers Branch ISD. Jen also taught science, health, and special ed for grants to Beulah County Schools, and she was the curriculum development manager for the U.S. Space and Rocket Center, where she and her team created the content used in the Space Camp and Aviation Challenge programs, as well as unique learning experiences at the Space and Rocket Center Museum. Jen, thanks so much for joining us tonight.
Good evening, everybody. We thank you for joining us, too.
And Doris has experience in the development and implementation of Gear Up programs in Texas. Past experience as a teacher, supervisor, project coordinator, grant writer, and trainer. She is currently consulting with 5 Gear Up partnerships and serves as a grants outreach consultant with Texas Instruments. Experience at local, state, and national venues, including the National Center for Community and Educational Partnerships, gives Doris a broad knowledge of education initiatives and practices. So Doris, we're really lucky to have you with us tonight. Thanks for joining us.
Well, thank you. Glad to be here. Hello, everybody.
We're expecting a large crowd, so your audio is muted. Feel free at any time to send any questions that you may have to Doris or Jenny using the Q&A window on the right side of your screen. We'll also be using the chat window to send general messages. As a reminder, the session is being recorded, and we'll provide a link to the event's certificate of attendance, as well as a link for the documents at the conclusion of the webinar. We hope you don't have any audio issues tonight, but in the event that you do, try selecting Communicate in the WebEx menu, choose Audio Broadcast, and then click Join. Doris, I'm giving you control. Feel free to share your screen.
All right. Thank you very much. We'll get started here. As Michael said, we are going, this is a 3-part series. Tonight is pretty much a general overview about grants. We actually kind of got started in this because everywhere we went, teachers said to us, you know, we'd really like to do more things in our classroom, but the district just doesn't have, or we've thought of something and it's not allocated. So we really started looking for grants that more or less teachers could write, and so a great number of what we're going to talk about tonight is going to be just that. There are things that you could do to write for a classroom. Some of them are larger grants that a district could write, but for the most part, we're talking about some small grants. So you should write a grant for that is exactly what we say to people. Okay, so I'm getting here on this is us. Sorry about that. Every now and then I hit a little glitch. Jennifer and I are a pair. We work together on this and do these, what we call a road trip of grant workshops all over the place. We've given you on our PowerPoint our information, and we want you to stay in touch with us. If you hit a snag or you have a question, well, we've given you our contact information, and we hope that you will contact us. So some of you may be brand new to grant writing, and others of you may have some experience. So we're trying to take a little time here on your, maybe in your chat window, you can let us know in a range of, say, from how many, maybe you can go in that chat room and tell us, you know, how many grants you've worked on. And if the answer is 0, that's okay too, because we actually we've tried to have something in this workshop for everybody, for experienced as well as people who are brand new. So I'm seeing now that there are several of you that are coming through who have a little experience. Some of you have no experience, brand new, and that's absolutely 100% fine because, as I say, we have something here that will help almost everyone. Great. Oh, we're getting really great response. Thank you. Okay, so some of you have worked on 1 or 2 grants, maybe as many as 3. Very good. Okay. Well, what we're going to do tonight, our agenda is to cover just a general overview about grant writing and to give you some sources that you can right away go to and look for some of the topics or some of the areas that you're interested in. I'm assuming a lot of you are interested in some technology, and so you know, there's going to be some things there for almost any type of grant. And then we're going to look at, when you write a grant, you will obviously be stating, you know, a need and some reason that you're applying for a grant. So Jennifer's going to go over later some data sources that you can use that would be good information, background information to give to funders when you're writing a grant. And then we'll move right away to some elements of success that make grants more successful than others. So I'm going to start right away with a little bit of information about the types of grants that are out there. And you're going to find that, in general, the grants that you're going to come in contact with in a classroom or maybe for a department or maybe for even a district, you're going to come into a lot of grants that are competitive grants where you're competing with other people across the nation or in an area for the monies that a funder is putting out there. And so those competitive grants can come from several sources. They can come from the federal government. Grants.gov is a site that you can go to, and it will give you a long list of almost every type of grant that is available. On that particular site, it's so vast that it has your ability on that site to screen your interest area or your topic so that you don't get like just tons and tons of grants that don't apply to you. So federal grants are almost always competitive. That means that a district or a university or even a classroom might write a grant, and you're competing against other people who are writing for the same money. And the grants are usually read by people that the funders will ask to be the readers, and then they will score those grants and they will award the top percentages depending on how far the money goes. Another type of competitive grant that you might run into are state or formula grants. Those will come to you in the form of your State Department of Ed usually. And many of your Title I or your other title funds will send out an RFP, a request for a proposal, and it's literally going to be from the state. It's more than anything going to be a fill in the blank, tell the number of students you're going to serve, what you plan to do with the money, maybe how you're going to manage the program. A lot of your after-school programs, ACE programs, will be like that, and there's a formula that goes with those grants that tells this is how much money per student this grant will fund. And those are also, even though they come from the State Department, that is flow-through money from the federal government, and those are also competitive. So even though They will send you an application. They're still only going to fund the top percentage of those grants. And then you're going to find a third or another type of grant out there, and those are grants that are going to come from foundations or private funding, or they might come, another category in that is businesses. You might find that Target is going to fund some grants for classrooms, or Boeing is going to fund some grants for classrooms. And we're going to show you where some of those grants are housed and where you can find out about those. The good news about the foundation and the private grants is that they usually are a little less cumbersome to write, and the funding usually arrives in it's a quicker turnaround in terms of the money. And you all might have in your local district, you might have even a foundation or an education group there, or even a business that is sending out applications for grants for education. So some of the things that we'll talk about tonight would be helpful, I think, if you know of some of those that are out there. If you know of any in your area and you want to put that in the chat window there, you can, because there's some of you may be actually coming to this particular webinar just with that in mind, that you're going to write one of those types of grants. So there's the same thing that you are looking at now is basic components of a grant. And these are parts of a grant that may or may not be in every grant proposal that you get. I'm going to switch this over and let Jenny talk about these, because these are we want to kind of almost teach a little vocabulary here about what you might encounter in some of the grants that you might come in contact with. Okay, Jen, it's up to you.
Okay, so let me get my PowerPoint up. Okay, so when we talk about grants, most grants have some basic components. They're always going to have an introduction or an overview. They're always going to have a statement of need where you're describing what it is you actually need for the grant, and then how you intend to address or solve the issue, how you intend to evaluate, and then, of course, a budget. But kind of going through the different parts, there's always some type of summary or abstract, which may also be an introduction. Some of those introductions can be a letter of introduction. Some of them will be multiple pages, and they're called an executive summary. And they will typically give you, a set number of pages. Now, the bulk of a grant is the statement of need or the problem, because that's where you're identifying what you need the funding for. It's also where you're going to describe how you intend to address it, what the parameters are that impact this need, and then you have objectives. So teachers are actually uniquely qualified to prepare a grant, in that on a daily basis and a weekly basis, you're writing unit and lesson plans. And so you already understand the formula that most grants use. This is just going to be slightly more prescribed with a lot more detail. There are two parts in how the grant works. One is what you're doing on a daily basis to address needs, and then the other part is your management plan, and that's going to include key personnel. So that's who's running the grant, who's spending the money, who's tracking the money spending, who's tracking the evaluation pieces, who's making sure that you're hitting your milestones. And that's different than the actual, the kids are going to do X, Y, and Z to address this particular need. And then there's always an evaluation piece, and those are going to be those milestones and how you're evaluating what's happening to identify whether or not you're actually successfully meeting the grant. Another part of a lot of grants is future funding and sustainability. Future funding or sustainability tends to tell a grant funder whether or not you're going to manage their money well, because they're looking for grants that give back to the community or to the body of knowledge. So they want to know that you have a plan to continue your grant or to be able to make use of whatever it is you have and keep that going. So you want to include how you intend to do that. And then, of course, there's a budget, which is exactly what you're going to spend money on, and where, if there's additional funding coming in, where that's coming from. And then, of course, you have your conclusion, where you're basically, you want to encourage them to fund your grant, and the key thing is to give them a sense of urgency. You don't want them to think that your grant can wait. You need them to actually think you need their money now. Appendices at the very last bit, that's going to be your big friend, because most grants have a set number of pages that are required for each section, and you can't go beyond that. And because they typically also include instructions that have to do with the margin size, the line spacing, the size of the font, the appendix becomes where you're going to put supplemental information. Anything that can't fit into your actual grant pages, you're going to move to that appendix. So kind of go back to look at certain parts specifically. When we talk about that executive summary or that abstract, that can also be a letter of introduction. Some grants you can only apply to based on a letter of invite from the grantor, but that's usually based on you initially submitting a letter of introduction or a cover page. And what this does is this is going to give a big picture overview of your overall proposal. So it's going to spell out the exact dollar amount. It's going to give a big overview of what you plan to do in the grant, and an overview of what the problem is and who that target audience is. But you have to know your proposal really, really well in order to do this within the page constraints that are typically involved. Normally you're taking something that might be 12 pages and condensing it into one single page letter. So that's why I say on this, the thing you want to do is you have to do it last. When you work on your proposal, you're putting in all the detail, and if you can really see each day throughout your grant what you're doing very clearly, it's easier to condense it down into something small and single-paged than you can if you're trying to do that first. Okay, so statement of need. This is where you're going to present the facts and the evidence of the need you're trying to get funded. It provides the reviewer with your understanding of the problem and an intro to the possible solutions that work with it. Basically, you're telling that funder that you know what you're talking about, you've done your homework, and you've addressed why this is going to solve the problem. Key part here is that this is where you're really going to hone in on why you need something. So, and I saw in the chat box that a lot of people were looking for technology, robotics, and other things. And there are very few grants at all that are going to cover technology by itself. So when you think of that technology, the technology isn't the need. Okay, the need is that tool to do something specific educationally. So when you think of needing Chromebooks, for example, you have an educational purpose or intention for that Chromebook. It's not just, oh, the kids need to hold the Chromebook, or I need Chromebooks in my classroom so that they can write things down. You have an educational goal behind it. It's the same thing with the technology. You want robotics in the class because you want to introduce your kids to coding. And why do you want to introduce them to coding? Because we know that when we look at career and college readiness, coding is a critical piece to that. It helps students problem solve. So really, the actual need is to help your kids problem solve, and this is just the tool or the vehicle to get there. So your statement of need really needs to hone in on exactly what that real need is behind whatever else it is you're looking at. I use an analogy to describe the statement of need as being, especially when it comes to needing tools. The tool is the hot dog. The statement of need is going to be the bun that you wrap it in. So your bun is that educational purpose. So you have to have a really nice bun, okay? So project description. This is just like in your lesson plan where you're detailing the objectives and methods that you're going to implement to make your students successful in what area that you've addressed as a need. So for example, if you were needing calculators and you're trying to help your students be able to model mathematic concepts or scientific concepts, then in here you would describe how you're going to use those calculators to address those skill needs. And so you would talk about that, but you need to have specific activities that you're going to do, specific labs or projects or whatever it is that you're doing, and how many assessments you're going to have. Are you going to do a pre-test and a pre-survey and a midpoint test and survey and a post-test and survey? The person needs to, that's reading your proposal needs to be able to see very clearly what it is you're doing. If they're hearing it and they can't envision it in their head, you haven't sold them on the idea and you haven't described it clear enough. And it needs to be done in such a way and written in such a way that it is not in education speak, because 9 times out of 10 your reviewer is not an educator. And so you have to be describing it in a way that someone who's not in the field of education can understand. Which takes me to budget. It sounds weird, we do the executive summary last, but you write your budget first. The reason for writing the budget first is because it's going to save you time and energy in the writing phase. Because when you're putting your budget together, you're going to be able to identify what your spending is, and that's going to help you to recognize what activities you actually can and can't do based on the total amount of money that you're going to have. And if you have that spelled out very clearly, it informs everything else that you do. And it also shows the reviewer that you really understand what it is you're trying to do and how you want to go about doing it. Our third workshop via webinar is going to be specifically on budget. So we're going to look at that and address that. And our second one is where we will really go into that statement of need, because those are the 2 most compelling pieces of your proposal. So I'm going to send it back to Doris, and we're going to go online to look at some funding sources.
Absolutely. Thanks, Jen. Let me go up here. Let me go to share my screen. Go back to, okay. We're going to let you have a chance to look at some funding sources here. We have selected a few sites that that have some ways that you can do a search for grants. And before we go to those, I just want to say that in each and every one of these, this is one of the things that one of the things that becomes very important, that you're persistent in looking for grants, because there are going to be lots and lots of grants out there. And because there are so many, sometimes people get discouraged and say, oh my gosh, I don't even know where to begin. But in most of the sites that we're going to show you, especially this first one, Get Ed Funding, you'll be able to do a filter and be able to put in your personal information, the grade levels, the specific courses maybe that you want information about. Maybe you will be able to put in the types of skills that you're interested in students learning. So the reason I say to hang in there with this one and stick with it is because it does allow you to customize searches for grants. And then it also allows you will have to join the site. Why don't we go to Get Ed Funding, and I'll show you what I'm talking about. So it will come up here in just a second. This site I found has lots and lots of really good ideas for teachers. It's going to ask you when you get to this site to log in, and actually what it's going to do before that is you go up to the dashboard and you're going to register at this site. It's free to register. Just give them the information, your name and your email address, and you may want to give them your home email address rather than the school email address, so either one will work. I'm just going to say that, you're going to begin to get a lot of emails in your inbox if you start looking for grants, and so I'm not sure which of those two emails you want to use, but nevertheless, you'll be excited because they'll update you all the time when new grants come out. But you'll register and then you'll log in, and then I am not logged in right now, but you would go to the area here called Search, and it will allow you to, as you see, customize a search. You can look at, first of all, the state that you are interested in, where you live or where you work, or what the state that you want funding for. If you put in national, it will send you all of the grants that any state could be eligible for. And again, that might be quite a few, but nevertheless, that's entirely up to you as to what you're looking for. You can determine what institution you're eligible to write for, and actually, this depends on what you want to receive grants about, whether you're a public or a private school, a charter school. If you're a public school, you'll just check that, and you can check all of them. But again, remember, the more things you check, the more grants they're going to start sending you, or grant applications. And then you go into grade levels there, and you determine, which grade levels you're most interested in receiving grants for. And then if you will look at focus, you can do a customized search, and you can put in, say you want STEM and you want technology education or technology. Maybe you want something for professional development. You can put all of those things in there. You can check all that apply to you. And then you go down to the content areas, math, science. You can look for literacy. You can look for all sorts of things. And then 21st century themes and skills that you're interested in. And maybe you want something in innovation, or you want media literacy, or you want something to do with critical thinking. And then you just put that search in, click that search button, and it will then come back and populate your screen with all of the grant applications that are out there. And they may be current or they may be past the deadline. So you have to watch for that as well when you get those. But even if they're past the deadline, it gives you an idea of the time of year that those grants are come about, and you can put that on your calendar and say, I know that grant's going to come about in October of every year, and I want to be sure I'm ready when it comes about the next time. And then you can go up to the top of this, and you can actually you can put a keyword for the search that you just customized. And then it'll give you, every time you go in there, you can put in that keyword and search for, technology. I'm interested in professional development for technology, and whatever you name it, it will show you those particular grants in those areas. So I really like this particular site. We've had lots of good success with people using it and writing grants that they received, so I hope it'll work well for you as well. If you are not, I'm sure if you are interested in technology and you're a classroom teacher in math or science, you're probably familiar with the STEM connector. It is a newsletter, more or less. It comes out periodically. You can subscribe to it. Again, it's free, and it will send you periodically different grants and different ideas for STEM education in the classroom. And some of those are initiatives that exist out there, and under each of the initiatives, like I'm going to put this one for Post-Secondary Pathways Innovation Lab, and it will tell you about that, and it will a lot of times have the statistics about it that you could use in a grant if you were going to write a grant, or it will also have in news and other pieces of research and resources. It will also have some grants that are available in STEM. So this is a really good site for you. If you haven't joined that, then I suggest that you do that. One of the grants that I believe is coming up pretty soon is called an iTest grant. Now this is from the National Science Foundation, and those of you who are brand new to grant writing, these are very comprehensive grants. So they would take a team of people in a district, and you're probably administrators and probably specialists to write one of these, but they are wonderful grants. They are innovative technology grants, and they're really looking for something. And if you're out there and you're thinking, gosh, I have a really cool idea that I really think would work, this would be something for you to look at, because it really, in this particular case, is looking for innovative ways that STEM and technology are a part of classrooms, and even in it could be over in the entire district even. So you can see, in this case, here's some important things about it. This says solicitation, and it has a number beside it. That's because when you click on this, it's going to take you to the grant application right away. And then coming down here, under date due, you can see that this one is going to be coming due on August the 8th of this year. So there's still time to look at this. And those of you who are real go-getters and interested in this, this would be something that you might want to consider. Take back to your district, talk to the district personnel, see if this is something that, first of all, when you write a grant, you always want to get permission to do it, because you don't want to do all that work and then find out that the district is indeed, isn't wanting to manage more grants. So be sure that you talk to someone about it. But you can see here that this one is interested in several aspects. A well-prepared STEM workforce. The challenge of preparing citizens for expanding workforce and the changing workplace environments calls for new innovations in STEM education. Wow, that's just what we talk about all the time in STEM. So you can look through this one and see that very strongly related to STEM skills, and then also workplace and STEM occupations and critical thinking, reasoning skills. I'm just looking through here. This is a very this would be a very comprehensive grant. I'm showing you that because you might want to put that on the side and check on that later. Another funding source that you might want to look at too is in the National Math Grants, in National Council of Teachers of Mathematics. They offer grants, and generally they are grants specifically for classrooms. And they're not grants like, okay, this is a research grant. This is going to be things that are going to help immediately in classrooms. Here's one, a deadline that's coming up. I'm just going to select one here. In November, Connecting Mathematics to Other Subject Areas, 9 through 12. Grants of up to $4,000 available to develop classroom materials and lessons, connecting mathematics to other disciplines. I mean, it's not huge, but it would be a way to get started on some things, some great ideas that you have out there, and you think, oh, I just need some funds to get a startup going here. Many of these are going to be very specific, and so depending on what you're interested in the mathematics area, then I urge you to look through these because they update this site often, and they're very, very specific for mathematics. And they're also, I'm going to go back to my PowerPoint, the science grants, we've given you a link for them. And here are some of the national science grants. You can go here to this site, and although it says Vernier, it really is, these are National Science Teachers Association. It's something that I think you'll really want to look at. It gives award winners, and that's always something good to know about when you go to these sites. Who else has won an award, or who else has won a grant from these people, and can I look at the examples of what has been funded in the past? So you know, okay, well, hey, I'm on the right track. I've got an idea here. This is something that they funded, and I'd like to give it a try too. So I'm going to urge you to use these funding sources, and I believe that we have also included a downloaded document that that has even more sites than this. So look for that. At the end, maybe Michael can talk about where you can locate that. All right? Okay. So one of the things on any one of these grants that you are going to write is that you're going to have some data sources. You know, they do not know what a wonderful person you are out there and how hard you're working. You're going to have to convince them that here's the data that supports what I'm asking for. Yes, I'm a wonderful teacher and I'm doing great things, but here's where our data is coming from that supports what we'd like to do, what we need, and here's how important it is. And so I'm going to toss this now back to Jen, and she's going to talk about some of those data sources. This is a really great piece to keep in mind when you're writing a grant, because it's not going to change that much, and you can keep it somewhere and remain pretty constant. Okay, Jen.
Okay, here I am. Michael, if you can pass the ball for me. All right. Okay, and I did see in the chat someone asked if you'll have access to the PowerPoint for later, and the answer to that is yes. We will certainly make this available for you because we want you to get out there and start looking. And Doris and I would love it if you apply for a grant. Let us know if you need help with the grant that you're applying for. Ask us for help. We would be thrilled to help you. We won't write it for you, but we will certainly, if it's TI products, I will definitely give you verbiage and help you to find the research that you need to support it. We'll happily review your proposal and give you suggestions and pointers to help you fix it up. So going on to data sources. There are going to be basically two types of data that you need to have for your proposal. The first is going to be data about the need. So when you talk about an educational need, you're going to want to have data to support that need. So that data can be your own test scores in your classroom, your own observations, because remember, you are a professional, you're licensed, and so your opinion actually does matter. But you're also going to want to have data from, say, your district assessment office that talks about your student demographics, how your kids are doing in math or science or reading, whatever your content area is. And you may also want State Department data that's about your school or your district, community information, information that comes from the Census Bureau, and places like that. So just to give you an idea, we're going to go look out at the Census Bureau. So looking here, this is called the American Fact Finder. And the nice thing about this is it finds all kinds of information. So I'm just going to put in Dallas, and I want the city in Texas. And so now it pulls up all these different types of data reports that I have access to. In this case, since I really wanted to look at students or things related to that, I could go and look and find the characteristics of the household. I could find out how many kids are in an area. If I needed something more related to income, I could pull that data up. I could even find data about how many people in my community or my school district have computers at home and internet access versus those that don't. So I could look at any one of these different things. So let's see. Let's just look at household families. So if I look here, I could go and see how many households, how many have a male householder, how many are female head of house, whether the household has few or more children, just different things that relate to what's going on. How many are under a certain population? So you could look at that. You could also go back and look at, like I said, the income level or the poverty level, because those can inform what you're looking at and what's going on in your community or in your school. Let's go back to the PowerPoint. So that's kind of where you find general data about your community. That's going to be in that Census Bureau. Then you also have, for example, your State Department of Education. Now, obviously, because I'm in Texas, I pull up Texas. But Texas is no different than any other state. Your State Department of Ed is going to keep student assessment results, whatever that testing score is. And they tend to keep any kind of record. So whether your state has a state exam or whether you're looking at college entrance exams, your end of course exams, you can go and find specific data about your school or district. So in Texas, of course, we have lots of different tests, but you could look at assessments for students with disabilities and pull data that way. So each state's going to be slightly different based on whatever. And you can go in and pull up data related to that. Now, some of these sites are complicated, so if you're not sure how to search, there's also somebody that you can contact who will help you to figure out how to find the data that you're looking for. So like looking at a statewide summary report, for example. I could pick the school year, and typically it's not going to be the immediate school year, and that's actually okay. A lot of people think you have to have last year's data. Well, if you really think about, let's look at 2017-2018 school year. The data's not out yet. There's enough there for the school to let parents know whether or not kids have passed or haven't passed, but that data hasn't finished being evaluated. And so it's not typically posted yet. So you would have to use the 2016-2017 school year data. And that data still applies because the likelihood that your school has changed dramatically from the year before is not very likely unless you've implemented some brand new strategy at school that's altered how you're doing things. So you could go in and look at the assessment results. You could go in and open up a particular school year and find the data, and then you could look at the exit level tests are here. There's a wide range of different types of reports and data, and that's just in student testing and accountability. They also have specific reports and data. So you can look by subject level and by test, so it just depends on what it is you're trying to find. Let's go back to the PowerPoint. In addition to those, and typically what you find at your district office is going to be more specific to your school, and it's going to be, some of it, a repeat of what the state has. So oftentimes the district assessment office is going to be easier than necessarily going to the State Department of Ed. for example, I pulled up Houston because I'll be there in July, and I can look at district information. So I can look at the number of students, the number of teachers, the different number of campuses. I can look at specific detail related to it. Just depends on what I'm trying to find. I can look at the racial ethnic groups, the percentage per grade, all sorts of data there. So it just depends on what you're trying to show. If you're looking at, for example, writing a grant for calculators, you're going to have to identify a particular educational need. So let's say for mathematics, you're looking at mathematic modeling and concepts. You would look at what objectives on your curriculum hit those particular needs, and then go look at your assessment tests and find out how your students did on that particular section of the test. And that's what data is going to inform what you're trying to do. Your particular district assessment office is going to have a lot of that information for you already. So it's really just finding the right person to go ask the question of. And let's go back here. And of course, the last two on here, the TI Research Library and the national organizations. The national organization is going to, that's like NCTM and STA. They're going to have research and data about what works. They'll also have data about what things students struggle with. And so that's going to have both information there. And then the TI Research Library, of course, is going to have information and research on TI products, TI technology, and TI professional development, which will help support any proposal where you're including TI technology or services. The one I've saved for last is the What Works Clearinghouse, because this falls into the category of solutions. So it's not going to be for your statement of need. This one's going to be for finding programs and solutions that have already undergone a certain amount of rigor and testing to ensure that they actually work. So it's not necessarily going out and having to buy a prepackaged program or anything like that, although they do keep those there, the ones that have been vetted and determined to be of quality. But it can be going in and looking at implementation practices that work best for kids. For example, when I speak of implementation practices, we know that if kids have a longer exposure to mathematics, so like if they do a double block or if they have math every single day, they do better than if they only have it for 45 minutes or once every other day. That's an implementation practice. And so there's lots of data about why that works. And so when you're thinking about what it is you want to do and what technology you're trying to incorporate, if that's where you're going, the What Works Clearinghouse is a great site for identifying things like that. And I'm only going to just kind of show you the cover page to give you an idea of what's available, because we've got about 7 minutes and there's still some other stuff we'd like to get to. So you can see here whether you're doing English learners, whatever your grade level is, even pre-K, kids with disabilities, math, science. If you need to do, nowadays social emotional is a big deal. So there's a lot of research about how to teach that. There's mathematics. There are things specifically related to career and college readiness. And then there are things about teacher training. So there's a lot of different stuff that's all right here in this one location to come look through. So let me go back to the PowerPoint. So we're not going to have you answer all these questions, but I want you to think about, and this is, when you get to PowerPoint, you'll have this. These are the types of information that, whether you're writing a proposal today or writing one 6 months from now, this information is going to be information that you would want to have on hand to look at and pull out and reference in any proposal, because it's going to apply to almost every proposal you do. And so obviously school district name, location, that's not going to change. how your school began or information about your community is not going to change, unless there's, where we have number 3, some kind of recent economic issue. And that could be, for example, in Kentucky and West Virginia, coal mining has fallen off. So that's a major change in a community, because there goes their major industry. So now they have to be looking to train students for something that may not even be within their community at this point in time, which is where coding, computer science, all of those kinds of things come into play. And that also opens up additional funding sources, because then you're looking at job-embedded type programs, things that help students to get dual credit opportunities, all things that go towards that post-secondary education that students are going to need in these types of communities. But knowing those issues can help inform what you're doing in your grant. Obviously, a description of your school and your student population, the economics of your community. Are you rural? Are you urban? Is your district under a budget shortfall? That's all information that is going to be helpful, and it doesn't change very often. Here's some other information. Current or past grants awarded. A lot of people don't want to include that they've received a prior grant because they're worried that a funder is going to say, oh, well, you got money, you don't need more. But that's typically not how that works. Surprisingly enough, like most of us, if we're going to hand money over to somebody else to manage, we want to know that they know what they're doing. So when a past grant has been awarded, whether it's to you or to your school or district, that actually shows a funder that you know what you're doing. And if not you personally, your district has people in it that know what they're doing when it comes to grants. And so get a list. Find out what grants your school's been awarded and who, and make sure that they're part of your team. Even if it's just to have them take a read-through on your proposal and make some suggestions. Okay, number 7, number of teachers and education levels. That's important because depending on whether you're talking about mathematics or science or job-embedded proposals where you're looking at buying technology, but you also need to train your teachers, you would want to have the number of teachers and education levels, because depending on the location, you may have teachers that are coming into teaching with the alternative certification. So their expertise in the field may be different than the person that's actually been through college and gotten their master's or their bachelor's in the field. And then, of course, any existing programs or initiatives. And lastly, get a list of the top 10 local businesses and organizations in your community and also in your state, because those things are going to help you to find partners to collaborate with. And that goes to that sustainability piece that when we talk about budget, we will talk about then. And I'm going to pass the ball back to Doris.
Okay. I am.
There you go.
Okay. I'm the presenter. Okay. And I'm going to click through here and get to the next piece. I've been chatting with some of you about this because with the things that Jen just told you, those are things that are so important. And you don't need to do that for every single grant every time. If you just do it once and kind of update it occasionally, just keep it someplace where you can find it again and use it, because those things don't change a whole lot. And they're just going to make such a difference to your ability to write a good grant. So it's time for us to kind of wrap this up. Here are some elements of success that we've talked about today. Honestly, you can't go wrong when you keep kids at the center of the grant and thinking, what do they need? What can we do for them? What would help? Some other things that really help in a grant, and I'm going to skip down this list, if you can build a mental picture for that reader of what it's like where you teach, what the needs are, what would help. And some of you ask, is it just for 1 year or is it for 2 years or how long is a grant? The grant application will tell you how long the funding is for. Some are for 1 year, some are for 3 years, some are for 7 years. So it will tell you that in which case that way you can write a grant that's more comprehensive. Be sure that be sure to tune in when we do that third part about the budget, because that's where people really get confused, and that is something that we can really kind of help you sort through there. And then very important, follow the guidelines, whatever the grant application calls for, whatever font size, whatever margins, whatever page limit, be sure you do those things, because that's the first way they will toss out a grant is if it doesn't have the general guidelines that were mentioned in the grant application. And really, that takes us to the end of our presentation. We totally thank you for tuning in, and we as I said, we've given you our contact information. So, you know, if you start writing a grant and you get stuck, or you want want another person to read it, well, don't hesitate to get in touch with us. We want you to succeed. So I'm going to toss it back. Michael can tell you about our upcoming workshops in August and September, and thank you again for sticking with us tonight.
Doris, thanks so much. Before things totally get tossed back to me, I did notice one question from Lorraine. I think it actually just echoes what you were just talking about, the general guidelines. Lorraine's question was, have you noticed that you should cite things a certain way as far as like APA or MLA format, or is it really, does it change from grant to grant?
It will. That's a really great question. It will change. They will give you all of those specs will be, and that would be for a really large, probably a federal grant. It will give you all of those guidelines. In fact, it will wear you down with specifics. And so, yes, it will tell you the format they're looking for. It will tell you. A lot about citing the resources, especially the What Works Clearinghouse and any research data. And that's where, when Jen talked about appendices, a lot of that can go in the appendices as well, where you're citing sources. And it'll tell you the style they're looking for. Great question.
Thanks so much, Doris. As both Doris and Jen mentioned, this is only a part one in a three-part series, and we're so glad to have you with us tonight. But we really hope that you will also continue learning with us. And our next webinar is going to be, part two is going to be in the end of August, and then another one in September. So to learn more and register for free, visit our website, education.ti.com, and go into the Professional Development tab and slide down to Webinars in the middle. And whenever you land on that page, visit the live T-Cubed webinars. And then whenever you scroll down, you can only check out the August 30th webinar or the September 20th webinar that you could register for. But also a lot of the webinars that we're going to have this fall, you can also, you might be interested in some of those as well. Again, they're all free, so please feel free to visit our website and learn more about our free webinars. Thanks so much. To receive a certificate of attendance as well as the documents for tonight, there's two separate links. Go ahead and click those links in the chat window. If you happen to miss them or maybe they're not working for one reason or another, don't worry about it. You'll automatically get a follow-up email in a couple of days. In that follow-up email will be a link to the recording so you can watch this and go at your own pace, a link to the certificate, as well as a link for the documents that were used tonight. And if you're watching this on demand, go ahead and copy that link into your favorite browser to receive your certificate. Thanks so much, Doris and Jen, for everything you shared tonight. It was really exciting to get just some initial feedback, and it looks to be really good. So, again, thanks so much for everything.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
And thanks again for joining us, and we hope to see you back online real soon. Have a great night.